Hello and welcome to the show. This is episode 138 of the Meet the Farmers podcast, and I'm your host, Ben Eagle. And I'm really excited to introduce today's guest. And I have a heap of questions, so I'm going to get straight into it. Janet Hughes is on the show.
Hello.
Janet will be known to many of you as the program director for the Future Farming and Countryside program at Defra. And she's also host over at the Future Farming podcast. From 2018 to 2019, she was based at the Department for Education, and before that, the government's digital service. For 10 years, she worked in scrutinising the London Assembly for the Greater London Authority, but that was quite a time.
It was.
She holds an MBA from the Open University and a degree in psychology and English from the University of Leeds. And according to her Twitter account, she's also a keen allotmenteer.
I am.
Janet, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the beginning in the way this usually works. Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
So in the beginning, my parents and all of my extended family are from Liverpool, and that's where I was born. And that's where I spent the first few years of my life. But when I was still quite little, we moved to Macclesfield, which is a town in Cheshire, just about 20 miles south of Manchester. And we lived on the edge of the town. So that's where I grew up, in a reasonably small town in the kind of Pennines kind of area.
Have you always had an interest in politics? And when and how did your interest in policy develop?
I have always had an interest in politics. I was debating whether I should reveal this fact, but I used to write to my MP when I was a teenager because I was very worried about the rainforests and the ozone layer. And I was very I don't know where it came from, but I was very engaged from quite a sort of early age in what was going on in the world and what was my part to play in it. And then whilst I got interested in policy kind of by accident, actually, because when I was at university, I knew I didn't want to become a psychologist because I'm not very good at leaving work at work. And I thought it might drive me crazy, much as I'm fascinated by the subject of humans and how they work. And I've taken that with me throughout my career. And I was looking for a role in the public sector because I wanted to do something meaningful and make a contribution in the public sector. And I accidentally came across the civil service and applied. I didn't actually join the civil service at that time, though. I went to the House of Commons, which I think we're going to come on to.
Yeah.
And I worked on international development and then defence policy in the House of Commons. And that's when my first proper exposure to policy and how government works and how things work and how public services work. And that ignited in me a passion which has taken me through my whole career of making public services work better for people. And that's what I'm all about and what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I was going to say, where does that, I suppose, again, where does that interest in people come from as well?
I don't know. I've always been really fascinated. I suppose it slightly comes from feeling a bit like I've always felt a bit of a misfit. And part of the way I sort of made humans my specialist subject to find out what makes them tick so I could become less of a misfit. I think that's what was driving me in my teenage years and at university to study psychology and get interested. Okay. But then just as I've progressed through my career, everything that I've ever worked on is always all about the people.
Yeah.
So you can work on a technology project or any other sort of delivery project or any other sort of piece of work. It's always about humans and how they interact with each other and how they respect and value each other and how they do things for each other. And I find that endlessly fascinating. And I just have a weird internal drive that I want to make the world a bit better. And I feel very deeply driven by that mission, and I want to make it better for the people who live in it. And I've always done jobs that are about that, really.
So you came to do a degree in psychology and English at Leeds.
Yeah.
Tell me about that time.
Yeah, so I was still very much finding my place in the world. I was sort of a bit nerdy and not quite sure. I was much too shy to join in with any of the societies or anything like that. Even though I was people who knew me around that time would say that I was very outgoing, and I was with my close friends.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, when I went to university, I was a bit lost. I didn't really know how to make more friends and get involved in things. I was a bit shy of doing all of that and a bit overwhelmed by it all. So I discovered psychology while I was there. I actually started doing French and English. Okay. And I quickly discovered that learning French words was not at all interesting to me beyond being able to have a chat. I just did not care about the subjunctive enough to spend my time on it. And I'd done a sort of module in psychology on the side, and I really got fascinated by it. I just was kind of blown away by the science of brains and how they work and social interactions and how they work. And that's where I started getting really fascinated by that.
Okay. That's interesting. So you didn't have any interest in going and living in France then?
Well, that was one of the reasons why I chose a French degree, because I thought
Okay.
I'd be able to go to Martinique and live there for a year. But,
that sounds like a pretty good reason to me.
But then I reasoned that doing 3 years of study just so that I could go to Martinique didn't really make a whole lot of sense, because I could always just go to places if I wanted to, and I didn't have to spend 3 years doing study that I wasn't finding interesting. Each to their own. I'd done French A level and I really enjoyed it, but I just was not interested with it at degree level at all.
Yeah.
But I was really interested in reading endless journals about scientific studies of humans and bonobo monkeys and other species, and how their brains worked.
Yeah, it's funny how you do change, don't you? Yeah, I got to AS level French. That was my peak, and I was like, definitely can't go beyond that.
And some things are interesting up to a point and then not beyond, and some things really ignite your enthusiasm. Like this role that I'm in now has really ignited. I am just feel on fire with enthusiasm about it, and I'm reading books about it all the time and learning about it all the time, and I absolutely love it. And there's a few, when that happens for you in life, everybody listening will know when that happens for you. Certainly when it happens for me, it's the best feeling ever when you find something you can be really fascinated by and really, really want to learn more about.
Absolutely. And it's I think it's the thing about this world as well, the food farming countryside world. There are so many angles to it, and again, it's as we find on the show, a lot of it is about the people as well.
It really is. And the farming reforms are all about the people, because if we don't make the things that we're doing work for farmers, then they're not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we really need to understand who are farmers, what's making them tick, what's important to them. And farming is a very diverse sector, as we know, with all sorts of different businesses and business models and individuals in it. So I'm combining my interest in the environment and farming with my fascination with humans in this role, and I'm loving it for that reason.
Yeah. I am keen to talk about your time at Defra and thoughts for the future.
Well, sorry, we'll come on to that.
But, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think it's important to talk about your career. Let's talk about your career before then. And as you mentioned earlier, you started your career as a clerk in the House of Commons.
I did.
Take me back to that time.
So it wasn't my first job. I had a lot of jobs before then. I actually started working when I was 11. Because my dad, who, if he listens to this, will laugh, wanted me to have a work ethic, and so I worked for someone that he knew who made fluorescent bicycle belts, and I packed them in his warehouse during the summer for £1 an hour when I was 11. And I did indeed get that work ethic. I worked very hard, and but then I started my first full-time sort of career type job in the House of Commons. So I genuinely to this day not quite sure how I slipped through the net and got a job at the House of Commons, because it was I felt like a right fish out of water when I arrived. In terms of the kind of people that get to have those sorts of jobs, and there were lots of people with PhDs and degrees from Oxford and Cambridge and things like that, and backgrounds very different to mine. But I loved it there. I really enjoyed it. I worked, the first job I had was on the Social Security Committee, but I was only there for a few months. And then I worked on the International Development Select Committee for 3 years. Okay. And in that role, we were holding the government to account and international agencies to account for how they spent money on international development and the policy and administration. And we traveled all over the place looking at how aid money was being spent in Africa and Asia and conflict zones and all sorts of things like that. And I really got to understand how politics work, how politicians work, how policy is developed, how things are delivered. And you really often look at things from the perspective of those that are on the receiving end of the delivery. And that's something that's stayed with me throughout my career, is that we often in government, we often look at things from our own perspective and think about what we're doing to folk, but we don't think about what it's like for the folk on the receiving end of our policies and our delivery. And that's why we fail. So that's what I learned. I accidentally stayed for a really long time at the Greater London Authority, because I left the House of Commons, which is an institution that's been there for hundreds of years and has, very like historical context and ways of operating, which I really enjoyed and learned a lot from. And it's normal in that sort of job to stay for your whole career. But I was among the generation that were joining thinking that was actually a bit weird, and having a job for your whole career wasn't really my expectation at all. And then the Greater London Authority was set up in 2001 after the first elections for the Mayor of London. And I was fortunate enough to get a job there, going and working for the London Assembly, who hold the Mayor of London to account. And so I was looking there at issues to do with transport, planning policy in London, the environment, climate change, water quality, air quality, housing, all sorts of issues. And I did some work there that stayed in my heart for a very long time. And the thing that I did that I'm most proud of and feel most emotionally connected to there was after the bombings in London in 2005, we did a review about what the lessons were to be learned about communication. And the way we did the review was by talking to people who had been caught up in those events. either had been injured or bereaved or had been in the vicinity when they happened, to find out what really happened to you on that day. And we made 50 odd recommendations about how agencies could get better prepared to respond to such events in future. And it was a very meaningful piece of work, because a lot of those folk that were caught up in that really wanted to make sure that the lessons were learned, so that if in future others wouldn't the same, any mistakes that have been made wouldn't be made again, and the lessons that have been learned would actually be applied in future. And they really wanted to have a platform for doing that, and we were able to create that platform. And we did a report that made a bunch of recommendations which were accepted. And when the inquiry was later done, the public inquiry into the events of that dreadful day, they referenced our report and the fact that it had made an impact, and it had really sort of helped to shape how responses happen in future. And it was that's the sort of thing that really gets me out of bed in the morning, making a difference on things like that, and providing a platform for people to be able to interact with their government and the people that are supposed to be there to serve them. Yeah. And I sort of that further cemented my deep belief in building a much closer connection between public services and the people who are operating them, and those who are on the receiving end of those services. Because the closer a connection you can build, the better you can make those public services work. And if you're running the public services, the more fulfilling it is. Yeah. It's nice to know you're doing a good job.
One of the massive transformations that's clearly happened in all parts of our lives, but especially when it comes to interacting with government, has been digital. And you worked, you did spent a bit of time working in the government's digital service. What were you working on during that time?
Yeah, so while I was at the Greater London Authority, I got really fascinated by, I've always been fascinated by technology. My dad's a computer engineer, and we had gadgets in our house when I was little. We were early adopters of things like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and my dad was always taking computers to pieces and putting them back together again, and I was quite fascinated by that, and learned how to code BBC on a BBC as a youngster. So I've always been interested in technology and gadgetry and that kind of thing. And I got really interested in data and the power of data while I was at the Greater London Authority, and I got really involved in people who were interested in the potential for digital and data to transform the way government works. And I started taking part in meetups and communities and online discussions about that kind of stuff with other folk that were just interested. And some of those folk founded GDS, the Government Digital Service, and they built the first prototype of gov.uk. And I was watching their work and thinking, God, that's amazing. That's so interesting. I need to get involved in that. That's the future. Yeah. That is. And I was very fortunate, because I was already part of that community. I knew those people that were building the organization and gov.uk. And as they were building the organization, I was one of the first 100, I think, or plus definitely the first 150 people into the Government Digital Service in 2012. So I was there when we launched gov.uk. Okay. And I was part of the, yeah, it was amazing. And I was part of the team that was moving all of the government. At that stage, there were thousands of different government websites. So unlike now, where if you want to know about COVID, you go to gov.uk, you get the information, it's true. You would have been getting different information on different websites. Okay. And you would have had to work out which one to go to. And I was part of the team that transferred all the government websites onto gov.uk. And I was particularly responsible for working out how to present policy information. At the time, the idea was that we would organise all the information government departments publish around the policies that they were trying to pursue and the outcomes they were trying to pursue. So I wrote 223 government policies down in plain language in consultation with all the departments, and I was part of the team that transferred them across to gov.uk. That was my first role there. And then afterwards, I was involved in all sorts of other stuff to do with digital delivery and making government services work better, basically.
Okay. So all that came together, and then you ended up at Defra. How did that happen? How did you come to work in Defra?
I did a few different things at Government Digital Service. I spent a couple of years working on identity assurance and how you prove your identity without turning up somewhere in person, which turns out is very complicated. I did a few other things too. And then I left in 2016, and then I was contracting for a while, just on my own, doing working with various different bits of government and also charities and other organizations. Look where they were, and the question they were all thinking was, how do we make our organization fit for a digital age? And so I was advising leadership teams on that, and I also got involved in delivery. I did some time in NHS Digital, working on digital delivery there, and also other bits of government. And then I landed in Department for Education, and actually what I was doing there was trying to set up a portfolio of their major delivery projects. They have a whole load of delivery projects there, building schools, refurbishing schools, recruiting teachers, setting up apprenticeships, all sorts of things. And the department wanted to get more of a delivery focus. And they asked me to come in and work with all the people running those projects to set up that portfolio, make sure it was working properly. But I became a proper civil servant instead of a contractor while I was there. And I literally just signed the contract when Defra put a call out for people to come and help with the delivery for Brexit, because Defra is one of the departments which has a large number of things to do as a result of Brexit, lots of new services to build and operate. And so I pitched up to help a bit here and there, and then I helped a bit more, and then I ended up spending actually all of my time here and no time in DFE. And then so I came over here permanently I can't remember when it was, 18 months ago now. So I've been here for 3 years in Defra. But the first year and a half I was working on Brexit, then I spent a few months working on COVID and getting food to vulnerable people. And now I'm here in the Future Farming Programme. So I never had a plan for my career at all. I've just pursued things that I'm interested in and communities that I connect with, and then sort of found my way into roles that suit me, if you see what I mean.
I know that, a lot of listeners will have different views on this, but I'm interested in does Defra, from a civil servant point of view, do different departments have different reputations? Are there sort of, so what was your perception of Defra sort of before you moved into it?
So they all
same?
They all have very different perceptions and very different reputations, and different types of civil servants gravitate towards different types of departments. So I'm really interested. The reason I'm now in a permanent job for the first time, the best part of a decade, doing this role is because I really wanted to commit to Defra as an organisation, and this is a particular project, and I wanted to commit to it for years and see it all the way through. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I love the combination of policy and delivery in a department. So I like a department that has that full range of things to do. So I'm much more interested in that than a wholly operational department like HMRC, where you're doing delivery all the time. I like to have the full range of stuff. And the reputation of Defra has changed over the last few years, because it used to be seen as a bit of a sort of backwater for academics and hippies. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But that's how it was seen around government, and it wasn't seen as a place to go if you're a kind of up and coming, self-starting, ambitious kind of a person at all. But then Brexit changed all that, because Defra has taken on a lot of responsibilities now domestically, whereas it used to really receive and interpret and try to influence European regulation and policy. It's now got its own set of policy responsibilities and some big chunky things to deliver. It's right at the heart of climate change and biodiversity, the two big, you might say, questions of our time that everybody is interested in and concerned about. And so we're right at the heart of all of that. So we had teams at COP26 doing really important work there. So now it's much more seen as a kind of place to work. And it's really, I find it a very vibrant department. I really like the people who work here. It's full of people there are people here with very deep expertise over decades in the particular niche thing that they're interested in. And I love working with nerdy folk who are interested in that kind of thing. But it's also got a real kind of delivery momentum and vibe around it, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, and your current role, which let's be honest, it probably wasn't for the faint-hearted to take on. It's quite a big job.
It is.
When you started that, what were the main challenges that you were facing? What was your thinking going into that role?
So I was familiar with the program because I'd been in Defra for 18 months. And so I understood sort of what it was and what I was getting into a reasonable amount before I went in, eyes open. And I really wanted to do it because I think it's such an important thing to get right. And I think it's exactly the sort of thing I like, where there's a real opportunity to connect policy and delivery with the people that it needs to work for. And I really wanted to come and give that a go. And I came into it, I don't obviously come from an agricultural background. My speciality is getting things done and making them work for people that they need to work for. And I've done that in education and health and in the London Assembly and all sorts of other places. And so I needed to learn about the agriculture sector pretty quickly. And I put out a tweet saying, who do I need to talk to? And I got a couple of 100 responses, and that gave me a good place to start. But there's also very the
joys of farming Twitter.
Yeah, brilliant. I love farming Twitter. It's brilliant. So I read quite a lot of books and did quite a lot of visits immediately, and got to know some of the organisations that are active in the area, and got chatting to people on Twitter and various other things. Started going to shows and turning up places and going on visits and talking to folks. So that was kind of learning about the sector aspect. And then I needed to get my head around what is it that we're trying to achieve here. and what are we delivering, and is that the right set of things, and are we on track to do them? And that took me a while. It takes a while to really get your head around what is the full range of things, because it's quite a broad mandate we've got. It covers regulation, it covers productivity, and it covers environmental land management, and we've got the existing schemes and arrangements and the new ones that we're trying to move over to. So there's quite a lot to get your head around, and understand. And then so there's kind of understanding the program and what have we got to do. And then the third thing is working out, right then, how do I add value in this situation? What can I bring to the table? Where are the gaps that I think need filling? How do I make sure we got the right people, the right skills, the right co-design arrangements, and all of that kind of stuff in place? And so I came into it really enthused and excited, really excited to be committing to something for some years, to see it all the way through to the end, having done lots of 3 months here, 3 months there type commitments over the preceding few years. But that breadth of experience really helps me, because it allows me to see, when I see a problem, there's not many problems that I haven't seen before somewhere, so I can think, oh, I know, I've seen that before in education, or I've seen that before wherever. So I know I've got a good idea about maybe how we can apply that learning here. So I really enjoy that. It's really good fun.
And what about right now? How are you feeling now about the process, and in terms of general sort of contentment levels?
I think, well, I'm not going to be content till it's done. I don't really do contentment. I've got a kind of itch inside that drives me to make things better, and I'm never really happy. So about having finished. So I won't be until we're done. And we're still in the foothills of getting this done. I think we made a lot of progress over the last year, nailing down what is the sustainable farming incentive going to look like, what are the new schemes going to look like, how do they need to work. But we've got a lot still to do. So when I was reflecting over the festive period, as I always do, I was read my notebooks back over the whole year and think, right then, well, what was I trying to do this year, and how far did I get, and what do I need to think about this year? I think there's no doubt there's a lot of challenges ahead, of all sorts, some that we can anticipate, some that will take us by surprise. I like a challenge and I enjoy working through them, but it's not going to be easy, and it isn't easy, and we need to just keep on holding on nerve and working through this stuff. I mean, I'm always very conscious that what we're talking about here is people's livelihoods. Yeah. And that is a very serious thing. Livelihoods and well-being, it doesn't get more serious than that. And so I'm always very conscious that there's always more we can do. I try really hard to reach out to people in the farming community and get to know them and kind of earn their trust, because I know that it's not there based on everything that's happened in the past. And so I feel acutely conscious. The more I go on, the more I feel conscious of the need for us to make sure we're really, really engaging with farmers, understanding where they're coming from and what they need, and what they need for this to work.
I think that's a really, really good point. Actually, it's something that Manette was saying in her session at Oxford last week. 3 words: remember the people. And this is all we're talking about here. It's with all of this, it's remember that we're talking about people's lives.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to me to get out on farm visits as much as I can. Yeah. I'm grounded again at the moment, because we're all being told to work at home if we can. But when I'm not grounded, I'm out at least once a fortnight on farm for a day, meeting farming folk, because you can read as much as you like. You can have as much online interaction as you like. And I do a lot of that on Twitter and the farming forum and other stuff. But there is no substitute for standing on a farm with a farmer and understanding what are they trying to do, what's getting in their way, how can we help. And those are the things that, when it's difficult, those are the moments that keep me going. Actually, I've been so inspired by lots of the farmers that I've met, and so sort of infused by the things that they're doing and the ways that we might be able to help, and the potential for them to feel like part of this is about farming gets a really bad rap publicly. Farmers get blamed for climate change and biodiversity loss and all that kind of thing, but there's so many farmers doing brilliant things on those fronts that don't really get airtime. And so part of what we're all about here is showing that positive aspect of the sector and the amazing contribution farmers can make. So getting out on farm and actually hanging out with farmers is really, really important for me to be able to do that thing that we're just talking about.
Yeah. So we are now in that transition period. It does feel like that as well. And you're gradually sort of drip feeding farmers, land managers with more detail regarding the future policy framework that we're going to in England. There has been a lot spoken about your process of evolution, not revolution. That's been mentioned quite a lot, and involving farmers in the process of change. We're still early days, but I'm interested, just from your personal point of view, how you think that approach is going down.
I think it's really tricky, because on the one hand, I know that farmers would really like us to be able to provide as much clarity and certainty as we can so that they can plan. And I completely understand that that's a thing that needs to happen. On the other hand, we need to test and learn as we go, because that is how you succeed when you're delivering big programs. And we know that from experience all over government. When you do a sort of, right, we've decided at the beginning every single detail and we're now going to spend 7 years delivering it, you will definitely have been wrong on a number of different fronts, and you'll probably fail, because you're going to learn things during that 7 years that are very important, and you need to make sure you're responding to what you're learning. So we're all the time trying to strike a balance where we give farmers enough information to plan, and I think we've done a lot more on that in the last 2 or 3 months, publishing information about sustainable farming and nature recovery and landscape recovery. We've got some more detail we need to get out over the next 3 to 6 months to give people enough to plan on, but we do need to retain some flexibility so that we can adapt and learn. And I tend to find that once I have a conversation with farmers about that, they can see enough. But I know that there are farmers that are frustrated that we haven't put enough detail out yet, and who think that it's time to just get on with it, actually, thanks. And we're not going to please everybody on that front. But I make no apology for retaining some degree of flexibility so that we can adapt and learn as we go, because that way, when we're done at the end of this 7 years and we've finished implementing all these reforms and we're into a business as usual type operation, we'll have a much better set of arrangements at that time if we do it in this way, I think.
Yeah, what have you learned personally about farmers and the farming sector since you joined Defra?
So coming into this sector, well, I did not know the incredible contribution lots of farmers are already making. Because as we were just discussing, farmers, generally speaking, don't get airtime to talk about the amazing things they're doing for nature and climate alongside food production on their farm. And many farmers are already doing that. We've got 40,000 farmers in environment schemes already, and plenty of others doing things just because they love it and they want to see lapwings and curlews and other things like that on yellow hammers on their farm. And so it's been really eye-opening for me to see how much is already happening in the sector. And I think there's much more we can do to make that much more known more broadly, and I think we should. I really enjoy working with farmers, because they're like Northerners after a strong cup of tea. They're very direct. they're not messing around.
Absolutely.
They're quite happy to tell you exactly what they think, and I really enjoy working with people like that. I much prefer that than the sort of slightly fake politeness that you often get in other sorts of surroundings. So I've in a way I feel quite at home in talking to farmers, because I'm Northern and we like to be direct, so that's quite nice. I think I learn all the time more about the sector and the environment and the food production, and I was just talking actually to some NFU colleagues this morning about where are the gaps. I was thinking over the Christmas period, where are the gaps in my knowledge? What sorts of farms have I not visited yet? Can they help me find the ones that I need to go and see? So there's loads that I've learned absolutely loads about that, but I feel like I've now learned enough to understand what it is that I don't know. Which is the sort of cycle of learning, isn't it? So I've spent a year and a half intensively trying to immerse myself in the sector, and now I'm getting to see like how huge the knowledge is that some people have. And the other thing I've learned is just the kind of how many people there are who really, really want these reforms to work and can see the opportunity that they offer and are willing to give their effort and time and trust and goodwill, despite all of the history and all of the kind of, they could easily just think, I'm not going to talk to Defra ever again after the last 20 years. But they don't, they continue engaging. And that's really inspiring to me, that there are folk that are willing to keep on giving us a go.
Now, farming is full of acronyms anyway, and we've already been learning some of the new ones coming out of your team.
Sorry,
but it's a new world. But over the next 2 years, what can we expect to learn? What's the next stage, as it were?
So the next 2 years, this is it now. This is real, and we are delivering the things. So we're going to launch the sustainable farming incentive to everyone this year. We've launched it in a pilot form last year. This year we're rolling it out for real to everybody, and we're doing that in an incremental way. So we're starting with just 2 or 3 standards that you can take part in, but then we'll be adding in more over the following couple of years, so that by 2024 that full scheme will be there. So that's going to be really exciting this summer to see how does that go and what can we learn and how do we improve it for the following years. We'll be launching the first landscape recovery projects actually very soon. We'll be launching a competition for those. Those are much more long-term, more radical land use change and habitat restoration type projects. So they'll run over kind of 20 years. And so that's going to be really interesting to see who comes forward for those. And we'll be launching the local nature recovery scheme. And that is basically the successor to countryside stewardship, but with brass knobs on. So it's going to be more collaborative, more locally targeted, wider range of options, much more straightforward, much fairer control regime, much more supportive. And we're going to do some more piloting on that this year, and then we're going to start rolling it out from 2023. So by the time we get to end of 2024, we'll have those 3 new schemes in place. and we'll be ready to start closing the existing schemes down, moving people across from one to the other. So there's a lot that's going to be done over the next couple of years. If I come back in 2 years' time, hopefully we will have delivered all of that successfully, and we'll have a lot more farmers taking part in schemes. We've got loads of productivity and innovation stuff going on as well alongside that. We've got a new Institute of Agriculture and Horticulture that's going to go live. We've got various productivity grants. We've got innovation and projects, including things on farm, but also helping people to adopt more innovative practices. And we've got the regulatory reform, of course, as well, because we're going to step away from basic payments by 2024 is the plan. And we will be having a new way to do enforcement of and inspections around the regulatory baseline by then too. And we want that to be much fairer and more proportionate too. So there's a lot that's coming over the next couple of years.
Plenty of work still to do.
Plenty. Yeah.
So I'm just going to test some specific questions from listeners. One from Emily Norton, actually, who was on last week.
Oh, yeah.
Oxford Farmer Conference Director from Savills.
Yes, I know Emily.
She was asking whether the payment rates for capital items for countryside stewardship, this is more of a short-term question, will be increasing alongside other items. Obviously, we had the announcement from George Eustace last week at Oxford.
Yeah, I've been asked this a lot, and I know there's a lot of folk who would like us to increase capital items. We're not planning to increase them at the moment, and we will be looking at the rates as we introduce capital items into the new schemes. We'll be looking at the payment rates there and introduce them at new rates, but we're not proposing to look at them for countryside stewardship. So the judgment we have to make here is we've got a limited amount of money because we're reducing basic payments gradually. So there's only a certain amount that comes out each year. We've seen an increase in uptake of countryside stewardship. We've increased the revenue payments, which is the ongoing payments you get for being in the scheme. We thought that was the most important thing to do and the best way to use the available money at that time. And then we're going to be rolling out a sustainable farming incentive. So we don't think it's right to prioritise increasing the capital rates. And that's why we're not planning to do it at this stage.
Okay. Another question. This is quite. I have edited this, but I am going to read as much of it as possible. But I think it's probably a sentiment that is quite a significant number of people are asking. So I'm going to read this out. During last week's Oxford Farming Conference, George Eustace put it to farmers that, quote, "We need producers to stand their ground and take a tough position with retailers in relationship to price and contract negotiations." Ironic that at the same time, Asda were announcing that they were going back on their promise made to the industry and consumers to stock only British beef, a decision taken purely on costs of supply. When we see such ruthlessness and disregard to an entire industry in such a manner, it's hard to comprehend how it would be possible for farmers to take any such stand, but I do believe that we should heed the words of Mr. Eustace and a stand we must take, starting with Defra themselves. Farming has been cited as one of the solutions to our environmental crisis, and one of the main tools we have is our ability to reach net zero as a nation. The new farm payment scheme is very much based on delivering public goods, but for many, the economics do not stack up. A good many will participate begrudgingly, as some sort of post-BPS support is needed to prop up food production during times of incredible farm inflation, while retailers continue to look to buy cheaply, even if that means ditching a commitment to British produce for cheaper imports, regardless of production or sustainability standards. We cannot let our food security fall more while we offshore our environmental responsibilities in an out-of-sight, out-of-mind way. So, and there was more, but that's all I'm saying. So my question to Janet, should farmers reject this policy, and if not, why?
So of course, it was not going to surprise you to say, it's a great question and very well put. It won't surprise you to say that I do not think you should reject this policy. And here's why. First of all, a lot of farmers want to do the things that we're going to pay you to do because it's good for their business and it's good for the environment. And lots of farmers want to do those things. And so this is about helping people do things they already want to do. It's not about forcing people to do stuff they don't want to do, generally speaking. And a lot of the stuff we're doing will benefit your bottom line alongside the environment. So if you become more efficient in some way, whether you're reducing your inputs, inorganic fertilizers or pesticides, or you're kind of ploughing less or what have you, then you will reduce your costs and improve your margin, and you'll also be being better for the environment and better for climate. So there's a lot of win-win-win here. And there's a lot of stuff looking after your soil, which is what we're going to pay you to do in the Sustainable Farming Incentive next year. That's good for your farm in the long term, as well as being good for the environment, biodiversity, water quality, and carbon. So the first reason you should participate is because I know you want to, really. And it's good for your business. And a lot of the stuff we're doing is in that sweet spot. And the second reason is because we have learned a huge amount from the schemes that we've been running over the last 20 years and before that about how to make schemes accessible and relevant and useful to farmers. And we're learning a huge amount of that from our co-design work and from our tests and trials that we've been running. We've got 3,000 farmers involved in running tests and trials to look at different aspects of how our new schemes should work in a way that actually makes sense for them. Last night, I was dialed into a webinar with the Uplands Alliance and the Foundation for Common Land, who were talking about some tests and trials they've been doing about how commons can participate in schemes. And it's brilliant, the stuff that they've done. And it really helps us to design schemes that are going to work. So the second reason is we're going to make these schemes work for you. I know that the proof of the pudding for that will be in the eating. And me just saying that makes no difference at all. And you need to see it happen. You will see when we launch SFI in the summer this year, you will see we've made it simpler. We've made it more accessible. We've tried to make it more relevant. And we've also changed the way we do penalties and inspections and that sort of stuff, where in the past we've had a very punitive regime, where if you make a mistake to 4 decimal places, then we fine you. And that penalty might go back several years. And that's very risky for farmers to take part in that. And it's disrespectful to farmers to treat them in that way. We're moving away from that. We've already started moving away from that. We're going to make it much fairer and more proportionate and less risky for you. If you're doing the right thing, but something's not quite panned out according to plan, we'll be much more supportive of helping you get back on track. I do hear what you say about the wider context and all the challenges that farmers face. And we're very conscious of that. I work very closely with my colleagues in Defra who look at things like supply chain issues and supply chain fairness, and we all work together to try to make sure that our policies add up to a coherent whole. And I do see that the farmers are facing a lot of challenges at the moment with input prices going up, supply chain issues, etc. But I think in that period of change, why not embrace something that's going to give you some certainty of income over a period of time that's going to be good for your bottom line, going to be good for your environment and good for your well-being.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, any period of transition is always going to be difficult. And this is, I mean, we're talking again at Oxford at both conferences actually last week. The word resilience came up a lot. I know it's something we talk about again and again on this show, and it's just a key time for that. I have heaps of other questions as well, but I'm very conscious of time, so we'll leave it on that side.
Okay.
For you personally, what's next for you? It's impossible to tell, but after the transition, will it be job done? Move on to a new challenge? Are you sort of what are your personal ambitions?
All I can see at the moment is this, and I'm going to be here to see this through and make sure that it works. I know that often people often say to me they're worried that I've turned up and I'll be gone in a year. I don't want to do that. I want to see this through and make it actually work and make sure it's really stabilized and ready to hand on. And then at some point, you won't need a program. You won't need a person like me, because these things will be just run and it will be normal for them to be ongoing, improving things. And we're building systems and services for the next few decades here. So that beyond that, God, I don't know. I can't, way beyond my planning horizon. I'm full of this, and this is what I'm focused on, and this is what I will be. To kind of, I'm not really interested in climbing the greasy pole, as you can tell from my career. I've bounced around from place to place.
We always finish the show with the same 2 questions. The first is, if you have a message for the public, any message at all, what would it be?
I think take a look at what farmers are really doing before you criticize them. That's my message for the public, I think, in general.
And this will be a really interesting one. What is your message for farmers?
My message for farmers is change is definitely coming. Help us shape it. We're always looking for farmers to get involved in testing what we're doing. We're very serious about listening to what you've got to say. You'll see that we do change things as a result of the feedback that we get from farmers and the engagement that we have. So if you're seeing what we're doing and thinking, well, that's not going to work for me, then get in touch. I'm very easy to find. You can find me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest place, or just Google me. I'm also on the farming forum, and I'm pretty active on there too. So I'm very easy to find. Get in touch and get involved and help us shape this so that it really works for you.
Well, Janet, thank you so much for coming on the show. Honestly, it's been brilliant to hear a little bit more about you as well. What a few years it's going to be. And I know, day in, day out, week in, week out on the show, we'll be exploring how farmers are reacting to that as we go. Next time on the show, we'll be joined by Craig Mitchie, who was actually last year was Farmers Weekly Poultry Farmer of the Year. So he'll be with me next week. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.